Horton is not feeling well at the moment. Hopefully we'll see him later today at Council. I am Councilmember Helene Schneider, and joining me is Mayor Bloom and Councilmember Falcone. We have 4 items today on the agenda, and we will take them in order. The first one is the fiscal year 2009 interim financial statements for 4 months ending October 31, 2008. Mr. Pearson. Hello.
Hello. Good afternoon. Councilmember Schneider, members of the committee, Bob Pearson, Finance Director, and the interims. We were here, in fact, last week with the interims for the first quarter ended September 30th. So what we have before you today are the interims for the 4 months ended October 31st. We don't have a formal presentation prepared for you. As you know, later in this agenda, we're going to be talking about the general fund in some detail. I will say that as far as the enterprise funds and the special revenue funds go, we don't have anything to report to you that to advise you of any concerns we have at this point with the enterprise funds. Everything seems to be well within budgetary expectations after 4 months of the fiscal year. And so we'd be glad to answer any questions you have on the city interims for the 4 months ending October.
Okay. Are there any questions from the committee? No, that's very good. I entertain a motion. Okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Okay. That was easy. Number 2, which is basically the same thing, the interim financial statements for the redevelopment agency.
Yes, and I'm going to say basically the same thing, which is that, as you know, the primary revenue source for the redevelopment agency, of course, is the property tax revenue. This is for the 4 months ended October as well. As you know, the bulk of our property taxes are received in December and the March-April time frame. We did have about $2.6 million of property tax revenue booked as of the end of October. But again, from a revenue standpoint, we pretty much know where we stand because of the county having provided us with assessed value and levy information. We also know now, at least temporarily, what the state will be taking from us in terms of our RDA property tax through another ERAF shift. And we're going to be talking right after this item about the RDA's fiscal year 2008 annual report. But we'd be glad to answer any questions you have on the interims through October on the expense side or expenditure side or the revenue side.
Okay. Thank you. We do have a question, Councilman.
Well, I guess that's where my question comes from, and it has to do with how this particular ERAF shift is going to be allocated. I mean, where is it coming from? Where is it going in terms of how do you spread it out across the year? Or are you going to do in a 1 quarter of the actual take? Or if you could, if it belongs in the next item, then fine, I can wait for that. But
no, it belongs here.
Okay.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Falcone, we under the rules we have until March, I think it is, to pay the county for our ERAF shift. We think we're going to have to bring you an agenda item asking you to formally bless the payment. We've done that in the past. But
bless it. I will never bless it.
Well,
I might give you authority to spend it.
Authorize
What
it.
if we vote no?
There you go.
Poor choice of words. To officially say uncle. And authorize the payment of the ERAF shift, and then we have until the spring to actually make the payment to the county. And so we make it to the county, and they put it into the ERAF shift pot, which ends up going to schools, basically.
Understood, but how do we allocate it? Is it across the board? Do you then go back and take from each quarter
No, we will just take it out of the annual
the
revenue.
one lump and, okay, thank
yes.
you.
But we get to keep the interest through until the moment we have to send it away.
That's correct.
Oh, that really small silver lining. Okay. Any other questions? I'll entertain a motion to council.
Second.
Okay. Moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Passes unanimously. Okay. Item number 3, the Redevelopment Agency 2008 Annual Report.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. As required under state law, we are presenting to you today the annual report for the Redevelopment Agency for the fiscal year ended June 30, 2008. And for that report, I will turn it over to Brian Bossy.
Good afternoon. As Mr. Pearson stated, I'm going to run you through the Redevelopment Agency's annual report. My name is Brian Bossy, and I'm the Redevelopment Supervisor. Starting things off, as Mr. Pearson just indicated, this is a requirement of the state, and it also requires us to get our legislative body's approval of the report before we send it off to the state. Sticking more along the legal guidelines, the report has to have a number of things. First is an independent financial audit, a report on our compliance with laws and regulations, a report on our projects and programs over the previous fiscal year, as well as a report on our housing activities over the previous fiscal year. So what we do is we take all that information and we put together our annual report. 3 components to it: the State Controller's report, our comprehensive annual financial report, or CAFR, and our State Housing and Community Development housing report. Package that all together, and with your blessing, we send that up to the state. I'm going to start off with the financial details real quick. The agency received an unqualified or clean opinion on the financial statements. We were found to be in compliance with all the redevelopment laws and regulations, and there were no material weaknesses in our internal controls. This is all handled by our finance department, and I can't thank them enough because they help us. Well, we don't really do any of the financial part of this except ask questions, and they're always there to help us out. So very appreciative for all their work. They do an unbelievable amount of work. Getting into the program section, this is, no offense to the finance people, this is the fun part of the report. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run you through the redevelopment projects, and then Mr. Stephen Falstich will run you through the housing program. I'm going to run you through some of the highlights of a number of projects, and this is always a really good exercise for us to do every year. It allows us to, at the end of the year, look back, see what we've accomplished over the previous year, giving your board's direction. We also get to look at where we're currently at with our projects and, if possible, look out to the future and kind of where we're headed. And that becomes more and more important with our the sunset of the redevelopment agency coming in about 6 fiscal years. We have a total of 18 capital projects right now, with totaling about just under $25 million, and we have 6 community grants as well at a total of about $2.5 million. First, I'm going to go through cultural arts, and I think this is appropriate. The Granada Theater. Your board was responsible for providing a grant to the Granada, 2 grants actually that totaled $5 million. The Granada will continue to strengthen our burgeoning cultural arts district downtown. It's a state-of-the-art performing arts center, and the renovation is nothing outside of amazing. It's unbelievable, and that kind of goes in line with the agency board's general outlook on the arts. Over the past, you've realized how important that is, and you've made some very sound decisions of supporting the arts to the tune of a little over $13.5 million in community grants. A lot of those focused on arts groups. So a lot of funding has gone to those folks, and it continues to be a driving force in our downtown. Continuing with cultural arts, this year we had the state-of-the-art gallery version 4.0, and that was out on the streets from August 9th through November of this year. It was a wonderful, wonderful gallery. Over on the right, you'll see the Libero Theater. Your board was responsible for granting them a little over $200,000 grant to improve their system, their stereo system, their electronics, their lighting at the Libero Theater. What that does is results in better, higher quality performances, allows them to switch out performances quicker, which gets more performances in and continues to keep people downtown in the cultural arts district lively. In the lower left-hand corner is the future home of Summer Solstice. That's also known as the Community Arts Workshop. This is located at 631 Garden Street, the former motor pool area for the city. The building plans are currently in the final review stages in our building department. As you know, as we've made you aware of, there are some hazardous material issues on site. The site was previously remediated back in the 80s, but generally stuck to the open areas and not under the buildings, which is now where we're finding significant hazardous material issues. We're moving forward with testing and clearance of the site. It looks to be an approximately 1 to 2 year process to get that done. So that project, the construction of it will be placed on hold until we have a clear site. Moving into the parks portion of our program. On the left-hand side, you'll see that is not a park. That's 2 properties that the agency board was responsible for purchasing earlier this year to the tune of about $1.1 million. They're located on the corner of Bath and Ortega. These properties eventually, well, currently, for at least the next 2 years, they're being rented as affordable units with the help of the Housing Authority managing those properties for us. Eventually, they will be taken down, and when the bridge replacement immediately to the right of the picture, or in the photo, moves through in around 2011, they will be used for storage of those materials to help with that bridge replacement. And then Parks is looking at developing some form of park on that particular site, whether it's a child park or an open space. They'll be looking into that with redevelopment agency funding as well. Plaza de la Guerra. The subcommittee recently asked agency staff to look at 2 alternative approaches to the project, and we plan on bringing those alternatives back to the full agency board for consideration in late January or early February for your consideration. Both of those alternatives, just to let you know, do include all the just do it's, the improvement to the sidewalks, the electrical systems, the drainage, parking and landscaping issues as well. On the lower right is Plaza Veracruz, recently completed. This, I was looking back, I believe this was one of, if not the first city park, and I think it was created by City Resolution 2.5, I want to say, or 1.5. Very kind of funny. But a wonderful redo of that particular park, including new landscaping, new ADA access pathways throughout, new seating areas. A huge improvement led by the Parks Department and Public Works. Moving into downtown, these 2 corners at Chapala and Gutierrez, as well as Chapala and De La Guerra, were part of our Chapala Street improvements. Back in 2004, your board was responsible for approving the Chapala Street Streetscape Design Guidelines. Noting all the activity on Chapala Street, we wanted to do our best to facilitate the frontages of these particular developments so that there was some consistency throughout, and if possible, maybe the agency board, the redevelopment agency, could come through and kind of connect the dots. 2 particular projects in which your agency board did that were the Chapala 1 project, which is in the upper right-hand corner, and the Paseo Chapala project. Although these projects both had their approvals before the Chapala Street Design Guidelines went into place, they were nice enough, and they went along with the program and improved their frontages, and the redevelopment agency took the other 2 to 3 corners and improved those. So nice improvements along Chapala. Going up the street a little bit and over, we have Jardín de las Granadas, which is out in front of the Casa Las Granadas Affordable Housing Project, which is in front of the Granada Garage. And as you know, we've been out there for quite some time. This is likely the last piece on that particular block face that will be done. It's a very nice complement to all the other activity that's taking place there, and a wonderful addition to that civic area. On the lower left is Thompson Avenue. This is squeezed between Cost Plus and the Lines Moving and Storage Building, which is currently occupied by Brooks, and across the way from the Palace. This was a significant street improvement. Still vehicle access, but does create a more pedestrian-friendly area for that part of town. More on downtown, Fire Station number 1. The renovation currently, the cost is approximately $6.7 million, and it'll include a complete seismic retrofit as well as improvements throughout the entire inside of the building. We're looking for a silver LEED certification with that project as well, and they began in June of this year, and they look to be complete by late summer of 2009. Another side component of that is the Emergency Operations Center, which was recently discussed, I believe, last month at the Finance Committee's meeting. On your right is the police station locker room and heating, ventilation, and air conditioning renovation project. Both in need of significant improvement, and your board was responsible for setting aside $343,000 of redevelopment agency funding, as well as about $170 of general fund monies to fund the design and engineering of those improvements. I'm not going to get into this right now, but you will be looking at the two options before you for this particular project later today at our capital discussion at the full agency board. Waterfront area projects. On your upper left is West Cabrillo Boulevard. This is our West Cabrillo pedestrian improvement project. We are moving forward. We have received preliminary approvals from the Historic Landmarks Commission, and we plan on getting our final approvals in the coming months, with construction currently scheduled for May of this year. On your right is the East Cabrillo sidewalk project. This was completed in October of this year and included the replacement of over 5,000 lineal feet, just over a mile of sidewalk on East Cabrillo Boulevard, as well as new landscaping, a wonderful addition to the waterfront. And in your lower left, a bit hard to see, but that is our historic rail car that Fillmore and Western Rail is currently working on and refurbishing. It is the Santa Barbara car, for real. We didn't make that up, but it's from it's a 1914 Pullman car, and it's currently being refurbished out in Fillmore. It'll be placed down at the train depot adjacent. There's an old rail spur a ways away from the fig tree. And that'll be placed in, we're looking at March for the placement of that particular rail car. Looking back, January 27th, 2005, we had an exercise in this very room. We call it the Wall. And we, at the end of that particular meeting, the agency board had given us the go-ahead on 38 capital projects, all very important projects. And we have been moving on all of those, but I just wanted to let you know our progress on those. Here's a quick update on those. The green are the projects that have been completed. Yellow are currently moving. The black asterisks are the ones that have been taken off the list. And the white are the ones we're still working on. And there are a number of other projects that have been put into this mix as well. I think we topped out at one point at 40 capital projects, but we are making significant progress on our projects, and we're currently at about, as I said at the start, 18 capital projects and trying to crank them out as best we can. And with that, I'll lead into the housing component, which is Stephen Falstich.
We have a question
Very
before you
quickly,
get there.
that last list, whereas the graphic is most enjoyable, a list of those that are green and yellow and black and white would be nice to have just as a laundry list.
Sure.
Or you can just blow up the graphic and hand them out, and that'll be fine too. So
That's a great idea, and you'll be seeing this again this afternoon. And what I'll try and do from
I
now
just
on
can't
then
read
is
the
kind
projects from here.
Yeah.
I want to be able to see them.
That's a great
Especially
idea.
the green one that's in the unfunded category. We obviously made a decision between 2005 and today to
Yeah, it
refund
hopped
it.
over, and I'll get the information.
Okay.
Again, I can't see it too well either, so
Great. Thank you.
I'll get clarity on that.
Mr. Falstich.
Thank you. Good afternoon. And this is a fun part for me, talking about affordable housing, and we've done quite a bit. The first slide is of a property that is land banked. We gave the City Housing Authority a loan of $4.8 million just in June of this year, and they are actively planning for a housing project of about 60 units, which would be for low-income downtown workers. It would be a wonderful component of our homelessness prevention work that we're doing here. The next project is the Building Hope project right across the street. And as you know, on December 3rd, there was a grand opening celebration. The residents are moving in across the street as we speak. There's 51 units. One of them's a manager unit, but there's 38 units for the Mental Health Association clients and 12 units for low-income downtown workers. And the city provided, and the agency provided $6.3 million in funding for that project. And also a big part of the financing was $10 million in low-income housing tax credits. And it's fun. I'm going to be presenting right after this presentation. You'll see the 2-minute time-lapse video, which is kind of fun. It starts with a view of the city parking lot across the street, which the agency donated to the project in exchange for the replacement of those 35 spaces in the new project across the street. And we don't quite have access to those, but we will soon. But you'll see the transmorgification from our parking lot to that beautiful project. Next project shows a couple of our housing rehabilitation loans, which have made a big difference to nonprofit providers in the city. The first is the Victoria Hotel. We've provided about $150,000 in the last couple of years for electrical improvements and security, and also correction of water intrusion in the basement. And the other is Sanctuary House, Sanctuary Psychiatric, and that we made a $50,000 grant. I think we're asking, or a smaller grant, but we're asking for about $250,000 in the near future for rehab of their 8-unit apartments. When they acquired the property, the city assisted with the acquisition and rehabilitation of Sanctuary House on the corner of, I think, Anapamu and De La Vina. But this project, we didn't have money to fund it at that point, so now we're going to be doing that, and that'll be great. You're well aware of the St. Vincent's project. It's the largest affordable housing project in the city that we've ever done. It's 170 units. 75 of the units are rentals for large families, beautiful big 3- and 4-bedroom units. The agency loaned $8.6 million on that project, and the county loaned $4.4. So that was a great collaboration. And another shot of the St. Vincent Senior Project. 95 rental units for low-income seniors, and the agency provided $6.8 million for that. So that was a beautiful project. And also you saw the Jardín in front of the Casas Las Granadas. These are 12 rental units for low-income downtown workers, sponsored by People's Self-Help Housing, and we provided about $1.2 million in home financing. That project opened in February of this year. Also, there was a grand opening, or actually it was I should say groundbreaking, that's right, last week by Habitat for Humanity at 618 San Pascual. That's going to be another of their wonderful self-help projects with 4 new low-income ownership units. The families have been selected, and they'll be helping to build this project. And the agency provided $400,000 in funding and for the acquisition, and another $660,000 in home funds, federal home funds that the city allocates for the construction, and work's going to start next year. This is another big project on the drawing boards. The city provided, the agency provided a $2 million loan to the Housing Authority for acquisition of this site at 416 to 424 East Coda, and the land sweeps around the corner to Olive Street as well for some parking access. And it's a 40,000 square foot site, and the plans are currently in development for 55 units for formerly homeless people. Again, this will fit into the city's priorities for addressing homelessness issues, and construction is anticipated to start next year. The Mom's property is across the street. We provided financing for the acquisition of the existing 8 units on the site back in 2000, and now they're projecting to build, let's see, how many units? About, I'm actually not sure. The plans aren't finalized at this point, but it'll probably be around 8 units, I think, something like that. And that will fit into the mission of Transition House. I didn't mention that this is a Transition House project. In addition to this, we've given about $1.7 million in grants for housing rehabilitation for the Falding Hotel, Hotel de Riviera, Domestic Violence Solutions, and Pilgrim Terrace in the recent years as well. And and that's the Habitat project that has been occupied for a while, also 4 units over on Villa Lucero, 3 units on Villa Lucero. So now I'd like to show you that time lapse. And Brian, could you hit the lights on north, I think, there? It might just make it a little easier to see. And let's see, where's my... That's the screen. We don't need that screen, Brian. Thank you. That's better. Thank you. I'm thinking of the lights right overhead. Maybe I'm thinking of the wrong ones, but... Oh, for the TV. There you go. Okay. This is the the city parking lot, and there's no sound to this, but we took over 14,000 individual photos at 15-minute intervals. These are mainly at one-day intervals, but sometimes there's full days of construction that were shown. Anyway, the camera was mounted in Dave Gustafson's office, and he got to hear it click every 15 minutes. So, yeah. He's twitching, yeah. That's right. So there's the decking going over to, in preparation for the pour for the roof of the parking structure there. And there's the pour. That's one of those all-day shots. And here comes the steel for the commercial sections in the front, the office space for the Mental Health Association. Here's another pour of that. Yeah. And then they brought in a crane to do the bring all the lumber in for the framing. These, again, are one a day, generally taken at noon. And then we're going to go into, here's a full day of plastering. Let's work on the dome, the tiling. That's right. Now they're doing some roofing, putting on red tiles. And that's that. So that's a lot of fun. Good. Okay.
Any questions from the committee? I've just one question, just looking forward, actually, with the new administration in Washington, D.C. and the potential new HUD secretary. There might be some changes in policies as it relates to home funds or CDBG funding and other kinds of Section 8 and so forth. And I'm not sure what we have in store in terms of looking forward and capturing any kind of grants that come through. And I know also Jeanette Duncan, Executive Director of People Self-Help Housing, a couple of weeks ago was in Washington, D.C., meeting with the transition team on housing, talking about the next economic stimulus package and talking about housing as a potential stimulus package piece to it. So that may mean that we might want to put together a list of things that might be ready to go in case there's some funding, federal funding available for some of these future projects. But just to start thinking about that now and because there's going to be a change afoot in on the other coast and that may affect our policies. So just thought I'd bring that up here.
Good, thank you. We'll
Yeah.
certainly do that.
Thank you. Thank you. Anything else on this item? Unless there are any questions from the committee? This is just staying here. We're not going to council, so we just need to accept the annual report. So I'll entertain a motion for that. Okay, motion, second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. So carried. Thank you very much. Okay, so we had the fun part. Now the not so fun part. We have item number 4, the update on the general fund financial status. And Mr. Pearson, is that back to you?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, Bob Pearson, Finance Director, and we're going to do today, actually, and I, as you all know, I think I've spoken to you about this, and I've kind of apologized. You're going to hear this same basic presentation twice within a couple hours, but we did want to bring it to the Finance Committee first, and we did think it was important that all 7 of the council members hear this presentation today because, as everyone is well aware, the economy, both nationally and internationally, has been under significant duress now for quite some time. And as we know from reading the newspapers, and as we do because it's our business following what's going on in other local jurisdictions across both the state of California and the entire country, local governments, state governments are definitely being significantly impacted by what is going on in the economy these days. And unfortunately, but not unexpectedly, Santa Barbara is no exception to that. And so even though that this is the timing of this report in a way is a little unusual in that, as you know, we did the first quarter review last week, and we won't bring you mid-year until sometime in February. And the development of the fiscal year 2010 budget is really just beginning from a staff perspective. We thought it was very important to come to the Finance Committee and the Council today to give you an update on what it's looking like in terms of the fiscal status of the city's general fund. I want to stress that, as we know, events have been moving quickly over the last several months. As you also know, many times the data that we receive, particularly on our revenues, lags somewhat. And so all of the data that we're going to present you today is preliminary in nature. It's the best we can do. I'm not sure I know of anybody who's got a crystal ball that can look forward to fiscal year 2010, next fiscal year, and say with any kind of certainty what that's going to look like, where the bottom is, when the bottom is, all of those things. We just don't know. And so it's a really challenging time to be trying to project out what's going to be happening not just 6 months from now as we approach the end of the current fiscal year, but 18 months from now as we approach the end of fiscal year 2010 and what the impact is going to be on the city's revenues. So with that disclaimer, and by way of background, I've put up what I'm going to cover today, which is we're going to cover information on both fiscal years 2009 and 2010. Under 2009, I'm going to describe for you and show you that what we see is the scope of the problem, at least at this point. That's going to include, obviously, a revenue update on several of our key revenues, because in large measure, this is a revenue-driven problem. And then we're going to go over for you what management, what staff is doing to rebalance the budget for fiscal year 2009, the current fiscal year. Then we'll move on and talk about briefly about fiscal year 2010, which of course is more difficult to do because we're still 7 months or so away from even the start of that fiscal year, but give you at least a preliminary look at what we perceive to be the scope of the problem, and that will of course involve looking at the revenues. So with that, begin. For fiscal year 2009, you recall, obviously you will, that in June we adopted a balanced budget. You will also recall that, in that budget was included an appropriated reserve, a contingency amount that was included in the budget of about $700,000 that we put in there primarily because at that time we did not know what, if any, impacts the state budget solution would have on our general fund. But we did have a balanced budget. This is what we're looking at today. We started the scope of the problem. We had a budgeted use of reserves in the adopted budget of 0. We've had to make, however, adjustments as we go to our revenue estimates. You can see that we've shown on this schedule basically 4 of our major revenues: sales tax, property tax, the transient occupancy tax, and the utility users tax. And what we're looking at now is that cumulatively between those 4 primary tax revenues, having to lower our revenue estimates for those by a little more than $1.25 million, cumulatively about $1,262,000. As you'll see from the schedule, the vast majority of that is sales tax. And I think that should come as no surprise given what we know about the economy nationally and the retrenchment of consumer spending, which represents 2/3 of our GDP nationally. I'm going to get into more detail on all of these, but I wanted to start with giving you an overview. So really, we have to lower, so far at least, our revenue estimates for those tax revenues by about $1.25 million. In addition, we're going to have to lower what we refer to as our departmental revenue estimates by an additional $1.3 million. $1 million of that is listed on the schedule as fees and service charges. The vast majority of that are fees and service charges from the Community Development Department, particularly building permits and planning fees. And again, that should come as no surprise given the fact that we know that the construction and building industry has basically ground to a halt as a result of the economy and the credit crisis. Homeowners can't get home equity lines of credit like they could before. Commercial projects are having a difficult time, if not finding it impossible to receive financing for commercial projects. And so essentially the development activity has ground to a halt, and with it our building permit and planning related revenues. So we're looking at being under budget this year for those of about $1 million. In addition, we are looking at being under budget this year for our parking citation revenue, approximately $350,000. Again, we're going to talk a little more about these in detail, but I will say about the parking violations that over the last couple of years, we've raised the amount of the parking violations, the fine. And we've done a couple other things, one of which is we've made it very much easier for people to pay their parking citations because they can now do so online. And it's ironic because a fair amount of our parking citation revenue in the past was from the late payment penalties that associated with people that are paid by people who don't pay their parking fines on time. Our parking fines double if you don't pay them on time. You get a parking ticket. If it's a $41 ticket and you don't pay it within the allotted month or 5 weeks, it doubles to $82. And I think that the level of our parking citations now has reached the point where people are paying particular attention to avoiding that doubling, whereas in the past maybe there was less attention paid to that. And with the ease of being able to pay online now, I think we're seeing the impact of that. In addition to those two things, we have another category, and there are two components to the other category. One I know is, you'll recall, as we've talked about it, is the year-end variance. And for those of you for those people who may not know what that is, it's a fairly arcane budgeting mechanism whereby we include in the budget an estimate of the amount that we will end the year with, either expenditures under budget or revenues over budget. And the number that we include in there for this year is $2.4 million. And that represents the combination of what would be expected to be expenditures under budget at year end and revenues over budget at year end. So adding those two together, we budgeted as a revenue, but it's really a combination of both sides of the budget. The fact of the matter is that we are no longer experiencing revenues over budget. That's just the way it is. Last year we came in under budget, and as you can see from what we've talked about already, we're expecting to do the same this year. So we feel, as staff feels, that we really have to back out the year-end variance because we don't think it's realistic to expect the revenue piece of it. And I'll speak to the expenditure piece of it in a minute, because I think that part of it is still valid. But for now, we're backing out the entire $2.4 million. In addition, we have a fairly unusual situation where we have a number of longtime employees who are retiring at the end of the year. And on their way out the door, of course, they are entitled to cash out their accumulated leave balances and the like. And because of the unusual nature of the number of these people that are retiring and the length of their service, we really need to, it rises to the level where we have to factor it into our budget balancing situation, and that's about a $400,000 hit. So if we take those three categories together and add them up, you can see that without any further action, we would be looking at consuming about $5.4 million of reserves this fiscal year. I'm going to stop on that now, and we're going to take a quick look at some of the individual revenues that we just went over. If we'll start with the current fiscal year 09, and we're going to look at those same four revenues. And if we start with sales tax, you can see that the budget for the current fiscal year is approximately $20.4 million. That was actually, ironically, slightly less than the amount of sales tax we got last fiscal year. So we actually entered this fiscal year with the ability to see our sales tax decline year over year 0.3%, and we could still meet budget. Now, we thought that was fairly conservative at the time. It's been a long time since we actually could see negative growth or a decline in our sales tax and still meet budget. It turns out, obviously, in hindsight, that it wasn't conservative enough. I don't think anybody foresaw the depth of what we're in now. So we've updated our year-end estimate, and currently it is at about $19.2 million, $19,177,000, which is projecting a decline of some 6.4% from the last year's actual number. Doing so means that we have a negative budget variance for sales tax of $1.2 million, and that's the same number you saw on the recap sheet on the prior sheet. Property tax is still fairly good news. We're projecting about a 3.7% growth, and for all intents and purposes, we're projecting we're going to meet budget. A $37,000 variance on a $23 million revenue is virtually dead on. I think I probably would have rounded it to zero, but this is the way the number came out. Bed tax, again, you see that we needed 3.1% to make growth. We're now estimating 2.6% growth, still growth, which we'll talk about even more in a minute, but we're projecting a TOT shortfall of about $58,000 below budget this year. And then finally, utility tax, because of strong growth last fiscal year, we really only needed 1.8% growth to make budget this year. We're projecting now about 3.1% growth, which will give us a surplus by the end of the year of about $90,000. So there again, you see the $1,262,000 total of those that we went over moments ago. Now, to delve just a bit deeper on sales tax, we do have a new number in, which I don't think has been officially communicated to you. I know we certainly haven't released it publicly yet, and that is for the quarter ended September 30th. As you all know, the sales tax information we get from the state, the hard numbers we get quarterly, and we get it a quarter in arrears. So just late last week, we received the September sales tax quarter information, and we were down 0.6%, which frankly was good news, I think, because I was expecting something a lot worse than that. I do have a sheet which I'll hand you at the end of the meeting, which compares our sales tax results to other local jurisdictions within Santa Barbara County, as well as other areas of the state and the statewide numbers. The statewide total for the September quarter was down 3.2%. So we fared considerably better than the state did. But even the state's decline of 3.2% statewide was, I think, better than they expected. So the thing I want to point out on this schedule is if you look back to last year, you'll see that 4 out of the last 5 quarters, our sales tax has declined. and the only quarter in that period of time that showed an increase was an increase of 0.3%, so essentially flat. So it's been well over a year now, a year and a quarter, since we've really seen any kind of growth in our sales tax revenues, and I don't expect that to change anytime soon.
I have a question.
It's really more of a point of clarification, because you have a number on here that would probably scare the fur off most animals, and I just want it to be clarified a little bit. At the very end, at the very bottom of the last column, you have change from prior year in the cumulative line, and it has a negative 74%. Well, to be clear, that's based on the fact that we have 1 quarter's worth of this year's number
Right.
that's really not a true
No, that's
number.
Councilmember Falcone, you're absolutely right. That's comparing 1 year to a whole.
Back up here just a little
That's
bit.
comparing 1 quarter to a whole year.
Okay.
Yes.
So the 74, the number minus 74, is really probably shouldn't. I mean, I know that's the number based on the numbers that you have, but it's not a number in terms of year to date. Apples to apples.
That's correct.
Okay,
And let's
thank you.
hope
Just
that.
for anyone out there who sees this number and wants to run away with it, please
Right.
don't.
Thank you for the clarification.
Again, I'll point out that this schedule that you're looking at is on a calendar quarter basis. It's not on an accounting or an accrual basis. But if you look at the last 4 quarters for 2008, you'll see that overall for those 4 quarters, we were down 2.5%. Bed tax. More bad news, I'm afraid, because just yesterday we were able to compile the TOT numbers for the month of November, and it was down 11.6% from the prior year. So a precipitous drop, if I might be so bold, really down 11.6%, which means that now, after 5 months of the fiscal year, we are only up 0.7%. And as you may recall from the first slide, we need about 2.6% growth to meet budget. Prior to this month, this November figure, we were right on that 2.6%. We haven't even had a chance to update that yet, since literally this 11.6% number was, we were only reporting it. It only came in yesterday. So, not good news. We are now behind the curve in terms of the year-end estimate for TOT, and we'll certainly have to revisit that revenue estimate as we go forward, because it's now, I think, likely that we will stand a very good chance of having to revise our TOT estimate further downward. Utility users tax. Pretty good news on that so far, at least. After 5 months of the fiscal year, we are up 6.1%. This schedule shows the entire amount of the utility tax, which is, as you know, both the half that goes to the general fund and the half that goes to the streets fund. But again, up 6.1%. And as I said on the original schedule, we do expect to exceed budget for utility tax, and we have factored that into our number. Another one that I wanted to show you, but that we haven't adjusted anything formally yet for this fiscal year, is interest or investment income. You can see that after 5 months of the fiscal year, we're down 15.2% from last year. We did indeed expect this, and we did lower our budget estimate as we were looking forward. But you can see that it's unlikely that we're going to make our budget estimate this year, because we have a budget of about $1,434,000, and being down 15.2% from last year means that we're unlikely to make budget. So we probably have to factor this in as well. And you can see that in large measure, November was down 23% and September down 23%. So I haven't heard anything yet today, but the Federal Reserve Open Market Committee is meeting again today. And the consensus that I've been hearing is that they're going to cut rates once again, as much as 0.5%, and somebody said even 3/4. Yeah. They did already?
Do we know what they've done? 3/4?
To a full percent. Wow.
So they did act at 3/4 then. Yeah.
Okay. Did you
So-
have a question? question, or was that your
No,
question?
that was it.
Okay.
Yeah.
What have they done?
So that, I mean, we can only
that
expect
we
that
did
our
today, but-
investment income will be further negatively impacted by that.
Just a question back on the sales tax. Do we know what sectors in particular are being affected the most? Or, I mean, it's probably across the board, but
Actually, I can speak to that a little bit. We haven't gotten the detail yet on the September quarter. You'll remember that the June quarter was down 7.4%, and that's the most recent quarter that we have details on. The September quarter details we'll be receiving within the next week. But for the June quarter, it was clearly impacted by new car sales. And I will also say that retail sales at the larger retail outlets, whether you're talking Saks or Nordstrom or Macy's or those larger retail stores, were also negatively impacted fairly dramatically.
Okay.
So it was, I won't say across the board, but it was retail and car sales primarily.
which is what we're seeing nationwide. So
Right.
we're just a microcosm of that. Okay, thank you.
Exactly. Okay, so that is a look at the revenues as we see them at this point. Now, I want to go back to the original general fund schedule that I presented to you and add to the bottom of that schedule the proposed strategy, what staff is actually doing, and this is already underway to rebalance the budget. And I'm going to go through these for you. Essentially, as we pointed out, to recap, we have about a $5.4 million problem this year. My sense of things is, based on what I just described to you in the TOT and the investment income, that we may still have to revisit that number, and that number could grow, and we'll react accordingly. Because you'll recall from, I think, numbers we presented to you last week as part of the fiscal year 2008 audited financial statements, the CAFR, that we really, in staff's opinion, cannot contemplate the use of additional reserves in the current fiscal year, because we finished last fiscal year, June 30, 08, with only about $950,000 left in our budget reserve, which the policy says should be something north of $10 million. So we're really about 90% depleted there, and staff feels pretty strongly that we need to stop that, because we basically depleted our budget reserve as the economy has moved away from us. Certainly, remember, we used about $3.1 million in reserves last year, and that kind of did sneak up on us, because the fact is that the economy moved away from us so quickly that in the last quarter or 4 months of the fiscal year that there really was no time to react in time to avoid that. And so you'll see as we go through this that staff is not recommending any use of general fund reserves to rebalance this year's budget. So having said that, what is the plan? Well, out of the roughly $5.5 million in big chunks, we're asking departments to identify $3 million in savings from their existing budget authority, and the remaining $2.5 million will come from a series of sort of one-time options, and we'll go through these. So we start with, under the strategy to balance, expenditure savings of $3 million that we're asking departments to make, and they've already been informed of this. It was done, frankly, as a group. The general fund department heads got together and worked this through and decided that this was something that could be done, and it was a collective effort. The $3 million sounds like a lot. It's about 2.7% of the general fund. It is a lot, but it isn't quite as much as it might at first blush seem, because this goes back to the year-end variance discussion that we've had and that I mentioned a bit ago, and that is that normally, without even trying, we finish the year somewhere between $1 and $2 million under budget on the expenditure side. Normally, it's probably closer to the $1.5 to $2 million range, but if we say it's $1.5 million on average, then really what we're asking of departments is to find an extra $1.5 million other than what would naturally occur. So it really isn't quite as bad as asking, you say, well, $3 million, that's a lot of money to come up with in half a fiscal year, essentially. If it's 2.7% of the general fund, then that's essentially like asking them to cut 5.5, 5.4%. But it isn't that bad, because we would normally realize $1.5 million to $2 million. So So that's the piece there. That's the bulk of it. And then the other one-time measures that I mentioned, the first one I mentioned right up front, that the current year adopted budget included a $700,000 contingency for state budget action. Well, we now know, at least for the time being, that the state has not taken anything substantial from our general fund, so we can certainly make that $700,000 contingency fund, which is already in the budget, available for balancing. As you know, we've discussed this. We've used this already as part of the current fiscal year in the adopted budget. There is a substantial amount of workers' compensation reserves, which are above the actuarially required claim reserves. And so we're proposing to draw an additional $600,000 of that. There's about $2 million available. We're going to propose to draw about $600,000 of it. In addition, the city's what we call intra-city services funds, which are the funds such as vehicle maintenance, vehicle replacement, information systems, building maintenance, and all those that provide services to the other general fund, to the general fund and the other city funds on a fee basis, on a charge basis. We're going to reduce those charges to the general fund by 3%. And that will recover about $243,000. In addition, the street sweeping fund has available reserves of about $1 million. We are going to take about $500,000 of those. Those are generated from parking citation revenue, which otherwise would have been general fund money if it weren't for the street sweeping program. We are going to reduce the capital program for this year. We've gone through the capital program carefully, and we've identified about $300,000 of approved capital projects that we can delay. And then finally, it's a capital project also, but it rises to the level of its own number because it's a large one, and that is the replacement of our financial management system, our city software financial management system. We currently have $425,000 budgeted in the current year to begin that process. We're going to push that back to after July 1 into the next fiscal year. We're continuing to work on it, but really the timing isn't going to be affected dramatically at all on this because of the pace of the project. Frankly, it would have been probably close to May or June before we needed this money anyway, and so we're really talking about delaying maybe 60 days at most. Not a material delay in staff's opinion.
Question about that?
Okay, because that's a project that we've been talking about for a number of years. It's massive, it's enormous, it's very expensive. It's a year-over-year project. I mean, this is like a 4-year from beginning to end kind of a process. So you're saying that this delay is not going to meaningfully cut into when we get to the end of that, because this is a system-wide change. And I know we've changed certain things in specific areas to get to specific issues now, and those things have been done. But to get to the system-wide change, you're saying that we're going to still essentially be on track
Yes.
with the program.
Yes,
Okay.
I am.
Okay.
Okay.
In fact, we have in January, we've narrowed it down to 3 vendors, and we're having a series of 3. Each vendor is going to be on site in January for 2 days of demonstrations. So we are continuing to proceed forward.
But of course, that's then $425,000 we have to find in next year's
Well, we're just going to
budget.
push it. We'll push it next
right.
year. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and obviously, as we'll talk a little bit about 2010 in a minute, but obviously, I think it will be obvious that we'll have to revisit, the capital program for next year as well, and look at
Right.
what we can afford and what we can't right now.
Okay.
So if you take all of those, if you take the $3 million departmental savings and you take those individual amounts that I've covered, you actually come up with about $5.7 million, which is good because I think we just saw, like with the TOT, that the numbers still may be moving away from us. But we do have 5.7, and then if you look at those right below that, that's about we have about another $735,000 available for additional revenue shortfalls. So I think we're giving ourselves a little bit of a cushion in case revenues continue to move away from us. I think it's an open question whether it's still enough. We'll have to see how deep and how long this is, and how dramatically it impacts our general fund revenues. So next, I'd like to show you the allocation of the $3 million that we talked about departmental adjustments. And I think you may have seen, no, you haven't seen this before. So we started with the adopted budget for the general fund by department. We did make adjustments to several of the departmental budgets because some of them include substantial budgeted amounts for particular specific items over which the department has little or no control. And so when we're allocating budget adjustments, it's our practice to back those out. A good example of that is for community development. We back out the arts funding and the human services funding, which combined is almost $1.4 million. And that is really something that they manage. That's their program, but really it's a separate budget line item and a separate program. So you see that the adopted budget by department, and then you see the percent of the total. So the first thing we did was we took the $3 million and allocated it strictly right across the board based on percent of budget. And that's the column entitled preliminary allocation. Then, in order to recognize public safety as being the number one priority of a local government, and what we did was we took $500,000 of that $3 million away from public safety. So essentially, we gave them back between fire and police combined $500,000. And we took that $500,000 and reallocated it across the other non-safety departments on a pro rata basis. And so that brings you to the allocated adjustment column on the far right, which is the amount that each department has been asked to bring their budget in under budget. And each and every one of these departments has expressed their opinion that this is something that can be done. So this is what the direction that has gone out, and this is what each of the departments is working on.
I just have a question on the timeline in terms of the line items per department. Are we going to see that in January when we start looking at next year's budget, or when? We have the numbers here, but obviously this might mean some changes in staffing or programs, or what's that timeline and how that moves
What
forward?
we're going to do, and this is also a little unusual, is we're planning as part of the mid-year budget review, which will be in February, to actually bring to you as part of the mid-year budget review recommended budget adjustments by department to actually lower the budgets to reflect these numbers, so that the budget, we can lower the revenue estimates and lower the expenditure side of the budget so that it'll still be in balance and recognizing these things that we have just gone over with you. That's a little unusual because normally what we would do is we'd simply leave the budget where it is and just issue the direction to the departments to do this, and then the revenues would fall where they would, and in the end it would be balanced, but we wouldn't actually adjust the budget. This time we're planning on doing that, and we will do that in February. To the extent that you have questions about the impacts on individual departments, I think we could bring that back to the Finance Committee. I don't know that for the most part, and I won't say without exception, but for the most part, these adjustments can be, I think, accomplished with minimal impacts on service levels this year. As we'll see, I don't think that'll carry to next year, but for this year. And the reason for that is what I said before, which is that normally as a collective general fund, we would come in $1.5 million or so under budget anyway. And so really we're talking about adjustments maybe in the 1.1, 1.2% range on average, and less for public safety because they were they had the $500,000 shift to hold them harmless for that extra $500,000. So,
Question?
So did I understand you correctly? I may have faded away for a second. I just want to be clear. The enumerated monies that come from the various different departments, community development, for instance, the city arts funding, the human service fund, those amounts listed down here at the bottom of the page were extracted off the top from the operating budgets of those departments from which they are controlled.
that's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
So then, just in terms of these adjustments, we may be looking at some vacancies that are staying open, but in terms of any eliminations of positions, that's a conversation that we may have for the next fiscal year. Because I would think if we're going to eliminate positions, that would be something the council would want to know up front.
Right. I would, yes, I think that's a fair statement. There certainly are vacancies, and we certainly have, it used to be a hiring chill. Now it's kind of more of a hiring freeze, frankly. I don't, I mean, any given position, if it's critical, can be presented to the city administrator for authorization to refill it. I know Jim considers each one of those on an individual basis. But the goal is really to have a hiring freeze in place.
So we're not going to see in February, for example, a list of positions to be eliminated?
No, that's correct.
Okay. I guess that's where I'm coming from in terms of what the department heads are doing between now and February, and then us doing the adjustments and the impact that has on particular programs and services, because that's what we go over in detail during the budget, and we just want to keep on top of that.
Right. That's a fair statement, though.
Okay.
Yes. So, well, if 2009, the current fiscal year, is grim, 2010 is looking grimmest, I would say. Yeah. If this is grim, grimmer, and grimmest, I don't like to, say this very often, but I'm rapidly approaching my 20-year anniversary with the city, and I can honestly say that I have never seen anything like this in all my time here. We all know, we've heard it said over, you watch the news, you read the newspaper, and everybody refers to this as the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. I don't think anybody's comparing it to the Great Depression, but certainly the worst since. And I think that, our experience and what we're seeing as we look forward would certainly be consistent with that characterization. I cut right to the bottom line, and then we'll go back and go through it a little bit. But if you just look at this one schedule, we're projecting that for fiscal year 2010, that we could have, an $8.3 million problem. And I can't even tell you that may be the end of it. Because, again, it depends on what our revenues do between now and, over the next 2 or 3 months. Particularly, obviously the December quarter sales tax numbers, the Christmas quarter, but we won't know that until, third week in March. Makes it very difficult. But I would say that based on what we see now, this is our best estimate, understanding all the caveats I gave you up front about how, in a sense, we're looking out 18 months at this point in what is, in a very major way, unprecedented in terms of the volatility that's out there. But we start with the fact that when we adopted the fiscal year 2009 budget, the current year budget, it was balanced, as we said, but we all recall, I think, that $2.5 million of that were essentially one-time measures. So that as we started looking forward to 2010, that really became our starting point, is a $2.5 million gap. And we knew we were going to have that. And that was all we were dealing with. I'd be feeling very Christmassy right now. But unfortunately, it's not. The sales tax, we're now looking at having to lower our projections from what was in the multi-year forecast by about $2.1 million. Property tax by about $271,000. Bed tax, $325,000. A little bit of UUT up. The real property transfer tax and interest income down about $425,000, and that was before today's rate cut. So altogether, those tax and significant revenues, we're having to lower our revenue estimates on those about $3.1 million. Then we come back to the year-end variance, and you'll notice that number is about $1.5 million, and that's because all we're proposing to remove from the year-end variance is the piece that would represent revenues over budget. As I said, the expenditures under happens, so we're proposing to remove the piece that's revenues over, and that's about $1,561,000. We're estimating, without having the details yet, this is a plug number in a sense, that we can reduce the capital program from the $1.9 million that was proposed, or projected, I should say, by about $700,000. So that could be used to help solve the problem. We're going to have to reduce, we believe, our departmental revenue estimates by about $2.3 million. Again, primarily the building permits and planning fees, the parking violations. And we had built into our multi-year forecast an assumption that we'd be able to increase departmental revenues by 4%. Not necessarily increase the fee levels, but either through fee increases or through activity increases, we would realize a 4% increase in departmental revenue. We don't believe that that's realistic anymore, so we're going to have to remove that. So those departmental revenues, about $2.3 million. We believe that right off the top we can sort of help by finding about $315,000 in miscellaneous adjustments to supplies and services. And there's a balancing number essentially of $146,000 for an update to the a more recent forecast. So that brings us to $8.3 million, which is probably about 7.7 or 7.8% of the general fund. And I'm not sure, as I said, that this is really as bad as it's going to get. I mean, it could be worse, but we're talking, 8.3, 8.4, $8.5 million, 8% of the general fund. I mean, when you think about that, it is a number that is scary because, as I know you're all well aware, 75% roughly of our general fund is personnel costs. I mean, it is what the general fund does. It provides services. That we're no different in that regard from virtually any local government. Half of our general fund is public safety. That we're much different than any other local government in the state or across the country that is a full-service local government. And so with those kind of parameters and looking at a number like $8.3 million, it's not a happy outlook. I just want to give you a quick look at the growth rates that we're basing these on for 2010 on these key general fund revenues. And again, it's the box to the far right, fiscal year 2010, and you can see that at this point we're projecting zero growth in sales tax. Now, the way things are going, that may be optimistic. I don't know. But for now, no growth. This is the projection. Property tax, we're still projecting 3% growth in property tax. So it's not, I don't think we're being overly conservative there. Bed tax, we're still projecting 2%, and with the utility tax, we're still projecting 3% positive growth. So really what we've got here is about a $6 million revenue problem and about a $2.5 million structural problem that we carried into this year based on the last year's $2.5 million of one-time solutions, $6 million revenue and a $2.5 million coming in problem, $8.5 million. And as you look at these revenue estimates, you can see that I think there's still some vulnerability there because sales tax is flat, and the other three that we show here, we're still projecting some modest growth, below our historical averages perhaps, but still modest growth. And so, we all know that we're losing Circuit City. I can't sort of talk about the exact numbers, but suffice it to say that it has been over the years one of our major sales tax generators, and that's not good news. And we don't know when the car market will turn around, and on and on and on. So it's depressing, I think. But you see the newsletters from the league and these other e-newsletters. You see, I think you probably do, what some of these other cities are talking about. We're not alone in this by any means. We saw a staff report, City of Chula Vista. They're talking about layoffs of 150 people. We heard anecdotally that Ventura is looking at a similar grim situation, and you see it all over the state. So that's what we're looking at. We just felt it was important enough to bring to you now to give you the heads up that this is what we're looking at. We do have a budget work session scheduled for the full council in January. In fact, we have 2 dates reserved. We're not sure which of those 2 we will use or both. The first of those is January 8th. So we'll obviously be making a decision on that soon, but we will be back to you in January to talk more about 2010 as we look forward, and to talk about in a big picture way what the strategy might be to try to balance the budget, because we just don't feel like we have the reserves that are going to be able to be used to sort of bridge us through this unfortunate economic situation. So I've talked way too long. I apologize.
No, it's okay.
Be glad to answer any questions.
Sure. Before we get there, I just want to make sure there's if there's any public comment that at this time, just to make sure we say that during the meeting. Okay, seeing none, I'll close the public comment. Any other questions or comments from the committee? Mayor Bloom.
I think it's really important that we acknowledge that we really have done some very good planning in the past, and we have done some very good budgeting, and with very conservative numbers all the way along, and I think we need to continue to do that. It's just that it's just amazing to me how quickly everything started falling apart. And it all started with the housing, with the mortgage thing. And now we're seeing a Ponzi scheme. It's just totally bizarre, I think, almost. And if it weren't, it would be a very interesting movie, but it's reality, So it's just amazing. So I guess I just want to say I think we need to really continue to do the, which we are doing, the very conservative look at our finances and also just keep on top of it. And I think the City Council is willing to work on this, but it's just very interesting times we're living in, and nobody could have predicted it. We sat here maybe 6 months ago. It wasn't, it just wasn't there. Although we started to see, when we look back, we started to see some indications, but not really for as low as we've gone. And I'm wondering, let me just put this out there a little bit. I'm wondering if the November TOT had to do with the fire. November 13th,
Madam Mayor, it's certainly possible.
11% down is kind of a huge number, but I don't want to blame anything.
No, it's certainly possible.
Yeah.
One of the things we do look at now regularly is the number of weekend days
Yeah.
in the month, and I can tell you that there were the same number of weekend days in November of 08 as there were in November of 07, so it isn't a basis problem, if you will.
Yeah.
But that's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I think we're hearing some anecdotal evidence from the lodging industry that things aren't good.
Right. Right. Okay.
Okay, well, thank you. We know you're the messenger. And I just want to say I appreciate that we're looking at this now as opposed to just humming along with a budget and then finding ourselves next spring with a much worse case scenario having to catch up. So making those budget adjustments mid-year here based on what's happening outside of our city is extremely important. So I do appreciate that. And we'll be hearing this again at council, but it'll be good. We'll have a full discussion with the council members.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with that, I'm adjourning the Finance Committee
Thank
meeting.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you at council.